So hello there and welcome to today's ZestCast. I'm Rachel McGuinness, the founder of Wake Up with Zest and the Zest Wellbeing Hub. And welcome back after our summer break. We've had a bit of a break over the past few months. But today we're back on the ZestCast and we are chatting to Lisa Lloyd from It's Time for Change, who's a psychologist. And Lisa's no stranger to the Zest Wellbeing Hub because she's a regular contributor of ours in the resilience section. So for today we are talking about banishing burnout. So before we get into talking about burnout, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into psychology?
Oh, good question. How to get into psychology? Just been fascinated with people's behaviour and how people respond and interact with each other. And I think I set up my company after doing lots of other jobs where I wanted to make a difference in terms of getting stuck into systems, stuck into organisations where you can really make a difference. Almost kind of looking at the bits of a problem that usually aren't tackled very well. So where previous jobs, you'd have lots of people coming in and giving advice for this, that and the other, but actually right at the heart of it were actually how people emotionally were responding to what was going on. And that was always the big gap for me. So hence getting into that.
Brilliant. So we're talking about burnout today, but why is burnout on the increase?
I think we're in a period of such significant change and uncertainty, particularly with everything that's happened with COVID. And we know that our brain really dislikes that. I mean, on a really simple level, if you think about, we all have a preferred hand for brushing our teeth. If you try and do the other hand, it feels really clunky, really awkward, and you have to really concentrate on that. So when we're going through periods of change, our brain becomes overwhelmed quite easily. It takes a lot of effort to process what's going on. So rather than doing stuff automatically, kind of subconsciously and just getting on with stuff because we know how it is, as soon as there's something different, we end up our brain has to work quite hard at that because we haven't got all the kind of neural connections, which means it just happens. And it means that it's just exhausting, it's just draining. So emotionally, we have more to juggle. And I think, we know that the rates of anxiety have gone up around COVID.
Yeah.
But no more time is given to processing that. And it's almost like we're having more and more thrown at us. There are fewer boundaries around work, particularly with remote work. We all know that there's that issue with being able to switch off, and there's no more that sense of working particular hours. With technology, we're on 24/7, constant notifications pinging in, and I lose track of the number of meetings I'm in, and people are just being binged every couple of minutes with stuff coming in. And I think companies are missing the chunk of focus that I think should be there, which is about the demanding more and more of employees, yet they're missing the point that the more they push employees to be able to jump through these hoops and cope with this change and so on, the more they push that, actually the less employees are able to perform, or people are able to perform. So I think that's it's just the rate of change right now.
And I guess we've got the added problem now of actually going back into the office and adapting to that, the hybrid way of working, and how is that going to affect burnout?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I was listening to something the other day where, when we were all in lockdown, we were all in it together. We were all stuck at home and you didn't have a choice. And now there's that sense of we can potentially go back to the office. Some of us might be choosing to, or you might be being made to go back to the office and you're not comfortable with it. And suddenly you've got very individual positions about a big topic, and you're no longer in it together, and people are feeling judged or criticised or anxious about what their stance is, maybe aren't very good at sort of empathy and understanding where other people are coming from. So I think the companies again are missing the emotional part of that journey, sort of operationally saying we're expecting this, but actually how does that feel? And even where companies are doing a great job of being flexible and saying it's up to you, individuals, how are they feeling about that in terms of being able to make that judgment, and whether they're going to be judged by their peers for not wanting to come into the office, That's a big deal at the moment. So it's very easy to think we've got it right because we've made this really great decision, but unless we check out how that lands with people, we don't know if that feels okay or not.
So there's a lot of awareness around mental health, but not so much about burnout.
No, I think you're right, there's been a huge amount around mental health now. And I think everyone, I mean, almost to the point I was saying this to some people the other day, some people are getting a little bit fed up of hearing about mental health and well-being. So it's like, it's so top of mind for a lot of people. And I think there's often a real focus on resilience. I'm hearing a lot, and actually being invited to go along talk a lot about resilience. I think the problem with that is there's a myth that it's about people not coping. So they're not strong enough. So we need to make more people more resilient so they can take on more and more and more. And I think lots of companies are wanting to build people up. You know, they're taking mental health seriously and saying we need to think about anxiety and depression. We need to make sure that we've got support in place and so on. But they're not really putting the sense of burnout in the same category. It's almost a sense of, if I was to put my hands up and say I'm not coping right now, that's a sign of weakness and I need to be more resilient, rather than actually it's a really... That doesn't help either, does it?
No, not sure what happened there.
When I just get booted out, my internet just crashed, sorry.
Right, okay, so that's not a problem. I thought it was me, but it's fine. So so we were talking about
companies too much. Yeah, and I think you know, I've been doing lots of work with leadership teams they're like, well, we've got to be on at this pace, we've got to be working at this kind of rate of you know, the rate of change, or this number of hours, or we've got to be taking on all this stuff right now, but we don't have a choice in it. And I think it's almost that expectation of, if we are expecting to be stressed and we're seeing it as part and parcel of the job, that means we're not challenging people and saying, hang on, you're looking like you've got too much on, you're looking like you know, you're not switching off, and that's unhelpful. We need to be, it's detrimental to our well-being if we're on all the time and we're stressed, and it's certainly detrimental to performance. And I think when companies have campaigns around mental health and so on, they're not holistic enough. They often are focusing on a particular strand, however they interpret mental health and well-being. They're not looking at the whole person. They're not looking at this sense of, you know, we all have limits and we're not invincible, and stress and expecting too much is part and parcel of that.
So you know, when we're in this sort of burnout or stress response, we're getting into our sympathetic nervous system, which I always call the foot on the accelerator. So what kind of signs should we be looking for if we're getting into burnout, and maybe we don't realize it, we don't realize until it's too late?
You know what, that's a really good question, because I think you're right, most people don't realize it until it's too late, and you get to that day of thinking, I can't get out of bed, or I just feel emotional and so on. And noticing early warning signs are really, really important. So for me, it's about noticing what's different to normal. So there's no one set of early warning signs. There are typical things, like people might be more emotional, so whether it's more tearful or more shouty or whatever that looks like. They might be more agitated, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping. There's a whole host of signs that are kind of quite common, but each one of us needs to know what our own signs are. And so if I notice that, you know, might be something, bite my nails more, or whatever it is, if I notice what they are and I can tune into those early, it means I'm in a good place to be able to do something positive. If I ignore those early signs and my emotional arousal increases, then I've lost the ability to take control. And I think where it's really powerful is when we let our teammates know, or those people around us know what our early warning signs are as well. So if they notice me beginning to show those signs that I could quite easily miss, and I've given them permission to say, look, Lisa, I know I've noticed that, you know, you just don't seem to be quite yourself today, or whatever. why don't you just go and take a break, or how can I help, or talk to me what's going on, is that giving permission as well for other people to notice. But these early warning signs are so critical.
And what is the difference between, or is there a difference between chronic stress and burnout?
I think some people with, it depends who you speak to in terms of whether there's a difference or not. So whether there's a right or wrong answer. I think some people can experience chronic stress, and they'll experience it very short term, and they might say, I'm experiencing this right now, but then they know that will pass. And some people will be in a place where they just feel they're stuck in it for quite a long time. I don't get too worried about labels, because I think as soon as you get on the labels route, people start excusing things or explaining things away. And I think I always come back to, whether you call it burnout, whether you call it chronic stress, whether you think it's okay, I can hold it because it's only for this week and next week I know I'll be okay, or I can't see my way out of it. It's actually looking at what that reality looks like for that person and dealing with that, and not getting too occupied with the with the labels.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I mean, we sort of talk about resilience, and it as you've kind of mentioned in conversations that we've had before, it's not all about resilience. Do you want to sort of expand a little bit on that? Yeah,
I think there's this whole notion with resilience that we have to be able to cope. If I'm made to be more resilient, then I can cope with whatever's being thrown at me. And there's been a lot of emphasis on resilience recently. Yeah. And I think the problem with that is sometimes it misses the point. So sometimes it misses the point of an individual level, where we need to know that actually we do have a we're not invincible. We do have a capacity that when that's full, we can't take on anymore. So you can carry on throwing stuff at me, expecting me to take it. But if my emotional arousal is really high, our amygdala, which is a kind of sensing what's going on, if that's triggering all the time and creating a fight-flight response, and we end up in a place where we are all consumed with emotional arousal, it blocks our prefrontal cortex, where we do our rational thinking, our problem solving and our planning, and being able to have empathy for other people and see other perspectives and so on. So I think when we're in a place where that's going on, you can't expect people to take on more and more. You can encourage them to be more resilient through things like self-care, and understanding how to look after themselves, and that's a really important aspect. And that's about individuals having that self-awareness and being enabled to be able to do that. But I think also the other part of resilience that companies miss is the fact that they need to take some responsibility, in terms of, you could have amazing resilient individuals, but if you're going into a toxic workplace culture, or somewhere that you don't feel psychologically safe to speak up and challenge and say, you know what, I feel overwhelmed right now, or I can't take on that extra piece of work, or I'm worried about this, then you're not going to get anywhere. So I think it's got to be two aspects. It's got to be at the individual level, and it's got to be at the level.
It's funny, because I sometimes have a bit of a problem with the word resilience, and I like to use the word sort of sway, because it's
like that.
Yeah. But because you're sort of bending and yielding to the different sort of pressures. I think resilience is a bit like sort of dropping a ball on the floor, because they talk about bouncing back, and it's like you sort of hit the floor and you bounce back. So
exactly. I often use this analogy, like, how heavy is this drink? And it's like, well, actually it's not very heavy, but if I held on and carried on holding on to that for the next hour or the next few hours, I would certainly be feeling my fingers. And you carry on holding it, I'm going to end up feeling really uncomfortable in my arm and my shoulder and so on. And we end up carrying too much around with us, and we need to be able to put that down. It's not about making us stronger to carry all that around. It's about listening and understanding, saying, what can I help you put down? And it's if we know, I talk a lot about an iceberg. We just see what's on the tip of the iceberg. We see what people want to show. So like before we jumped on this call, Rachel, and we were talking about the fact I've broken my ankle. So I'm sitting here kind of looking like this from the shoulders up, but underneath I've got my leg with an ice pack on, it's stuck on a basket under the desk and everything else. You don't get to see that bit that's underneath the camera. And I think it's very much like that when people come to work, whether that's in a remote way or physically, we only get to see the little bit on the top, and there's a huge amount going on underneath, and we need to be aware of that. So we need to be asking questions, we need to be checking in, we need to be, how often do managers check in with their teams? How often in a meeting do we have proper quality check-ins? And that's not and I've seen people say, oh yeah, we do that, and they've invited me into their meeting, and I see someone going around saying, almost like doing a register, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. How are you? I watched something really great on telly last night. How are you? That's not a proper check-in. Check-in's like, what's front of mind for you today? What are your challenges this week? What are you most excited about this week? What are you worried about? What could you do with help with? What could you help someone else with? And that's a proper check-in. And when you get that bit right, people feel heard and they feel empowered to be able to speak up when something's not right, and they feel supported. They've got people looking at their, looking after their back. And I think that's what makes the difference, is that quality of communication.
And what do you feel about having wellbeing reviews? I know we say this word wellbeing is kind of overused at the moment, but how do you feel about that, and maybe having it as part of a KPI to do with coping with what's going on at the moment?
I love it if it's done the right way. But again, like all these things, it's very much how it's interpreted by a company.
Yeah.
So if a company is saying, let's have these reviews, these wellbeing reviews, it depends how that's framed. That could be in a way of a two-way conversation. What are we doing that's really supporting, as a company, what are we doing that's really supporting your wellbeing? And what's getting in the way of your wellbeing? What could we be doing differently? Whereas you might have another company saying, how are you doing with your wellbeing, and what are you doing about it? Or companies turning around and saying, well, actually, we sent you on that workshop, so you know all about wellbeing now, and I'll do this. Some companies will ask me to go in and talk to them about mental health and wellbeing and self-awareness and strategies and so on. We can do all that, but then I always have this conversation with the leadership and say, it's all very well doing that, but unless you enable it in the workplace, it's not going to happen. Because people will say, oh, I know I should be taking a break right now because I know my performance is actually dropping off, but I can't do it. I've got too much to do. And actually, if I was to be seen having a break and going to the gym or whatever, and I've got all this stuff to do, I'm going to be criticised by my manager. So it really depends on the culture of that company.
Exactly, I was just going to say that.
Not a good thing.
And not a tick box exercise.
Oh yes, I hate that. And the tick box exercise is a real, it's a real kind of bugbear of mine. Because I really, having a workshop is great for awareness, whatever. But a lot of companies will do that, and then they'll just say, we've done it. Like having mental health first aid is great if they make a difference, but just having them in your building doesn't make a difference. So it's that sense of what difference is it making?
Yeah, absolutely. So what psychological approaches can we have to reducing burnout and stress?
I think the first thing is about that self-awareness, about recognizing your early warning signs, and then being able to know how to think about that differently. So there might be strategies you're using, such as knowing what you can take control of and not take control of. So, knowing that actually I'm feeling really overwhelmed by X, Y, and Z. I was saying to you, I'm feeling annoyed about my ankle taking so long to mend, but actually there's nothing I can do about that. It is what it is. I can influence it by doing the right things, but actually I can't spend my time just feeling stressed and overwhelmed by that. So I think knowing what we can take control of, knowing what we can let go of, recognizing that we are going to worry because there's such a lot of stuff happening right now that we need to think, what do we do with those worries? So can I delegate that worry to someone else? Is it something I need to do something about? Can I defer that worry to next week? Or can I just ditch that worry altogether? And it's that whole, what do I do with those worries is really, really important. I think when we talk to other people, we get other people's perspectives, that really helps. We know that when our emotional arousal is high, it blocks the part of our brain that's able to see a different perspective. So when you're feeling a place of burnout, you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, it's almost like having a spotlight on the problem, and we need to open it up to having a searchlight, which means you need to see other perspectives. Like, I don't have to just focus on this piece of work. I could go and speak to this person and say, can I have an extra 24 hours or whatever it might be. But to do that, you need to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You need to be able to step back and look at the big picture, which you can't do when your brain is in burnout mode. So you need to talk to other people, get their perspective as well. So being able to open up, they can help you reframe. You know, I can see you don't feel you can do that right now, but actually, once you speak to this person, you'll be able to do it. You know, there's that whole sense of actually turning a situation where you are right now into something that is achievable.
And what happens if we don't listen to all those early warning signs? How serious can it get?
Really serious. I mean, so one day a week I do psychotherapy, and I see people who are burnt out, and they are people who thought they were invincible. You know, we have to challenge this notion of the kind of people we think burn out. Actually, I've seen everyone and anyone from any walk of life in that situation where they've taken on too much, and they haven't noticed it kind of creeping up on them, and the changes in their behavior, and the changes in their mood, and so on. And they get to the point of, you know, wanting to lock themselves away. They can't face the world. They're so overwhelmed with where they're at. They're terrified if they speak to someone, they're going to be asked to do something else. Or how do they have a rational conversation? How do they make themselves understood? It can be completely debilitating. So I think, which is why for me, and knowing the rates of, you know, people who are at the kind of high stress, high burnout level, we need to be having this conversation very, very seriously, very often with people we're working with, because, you know, high companies who aren't taken seriously are missing the entire point when they're trying to improve their, you know, trying to have really good performance and really good relationships with their customers. You can't have a good relationship with customers if your people are burnt out, because they don't have empathy. They can't be performing at their best if they're burning out because their emotional arousal is too high. So it can be very, very serious.
So you've got the whole sort of debilitating thing that's going on. So that's all psychologically. So physically, what else can happen?
Well, we can end up, I mean, people they have all the physical effects, and then in terms of the early warning signs and so on. And if actually you ignore those, you know, I've seen people will stop eating, they'll start overeating, they're not sleeping. You know, there's all the number of physical illness has been very, very closely aligned. There's lots of research to show how that's affected by what's going on for our emotional health. So, and again, there are physical things that we can do to help where we're at. You know, I always say to people, if you're feeling your emotional arousal going up, then and you can feel yourself getting agitated, that's your fight flight brain starting to kick in. That's that adrenaline going around your body, and actually use that. So go and do something like just go for a speed walk for 10 minutes, or you know, I've known a guy I worked with once said I would just drop down and do 10 press-ups. I mean, whatever it is for you, it's that sense of, I've got this energy, I need to do something with it. Some people will want to practice mindfulness, and I know, you know, there's lots more awareness around about what that means now, right? And it's not that sitting cross-legged in lycra and emptying your mind, but it's just about being in the moment. We spend so much time worrying and being all consumed by what's coming next, or just thinking about what we did and it wasn't as good as it should have been, that we very rarely stop. And if we can, you know, my thing is about getting outside. If we can get outside, it changes perspective. We haven't got four walls around us. And if we look up, it changes perspective, because when our emotional arousal is high, we tend to look down and close in. And then when we can just focus on our breathing, you know, really simple breathing exercises, 7-11 breathing, breathe out longer than you breathe in. When you're aware of what you can hear and what you can smell, and just noticing, just being in that moment, it can slow everything down, particularly your heart rate, which is usually pumping very, very fast. And it just softens the muscles, which are kind of typical symptoms of burnout.
Yeah, one of the things I used to do in my corporate days when I had nightmare bosses was I used to go into the loos and sort of go and lock the door, and then just stretch and just breathe and just kind of just do this. And honestly, it just made me feel so much better if I couldn't go out.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to it, is working out what works for you, because you hear about strategies like, go for a walk, but actually if you can't go for a walk, I can't walk at the moment, so it's actually, well, what can I do that will work for me? And it's having to actually kind of prioritize that as something worth thinking about and focusing on, and saying, I know this is a need for me, so how am I going to make it work? Do I need to go and get a punching bag, or do I just, one really simple thing is if you're feeling tense and you can feel your muscles tightening up, and often people will around their neck or their shoulders or in their hands, is actually to just tighten that and hold it and then let it go, because we always feel more relaxed afterwards. It's actually magnifying the tension before you release it.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought of that before. Has anybody got any things that they do when they're stressed you'd like to share? Any sort of breathing? Michael?
Yeah, I actually do that last one there. I tense up whichever part of the body, often in my hands. I feel my fingers are starting to flick around, and then I do that thing. I stretch my fingers right out under the desk in the meeting, hold it, and then huge satisfaction comes from just the relief afterwards. So do that.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Michael. So are there any other things that that you think are relevant to burnout that we haven't covered already?
I think one thing that's worth thinking about, if you're working in a company, would be about how they are managing change right now, in terms of there's so much emphasis on the operational side of what's the logistics, that actually we're not tending to look after the individuals and help them work out how they fit into the picture. So if whether you're in as part of a company, or whether you're working for yourself or whatever it is, if you can look forward to the next week, the next month, and what things are going to look like, so you can predict how you're going to be able to respond to them, and where you fit in, what's expected of you, what people are looking for to know you're successful. So is it that people are measuring me on the number of hours I work, or are they measuring me on my output, which actually works better for me if I have a more integrated work-life balance? So I haven't got a set number of hours I have to do from start and finish. I can be flexible about how I work. So I think as long as we're starting to have those conversations more, and focus in on emotionally where people are at and what they're thinking looking ahead, and what they're feeling looking ahead, as well as where they are right now, and we start to unblock some of those barriers, those issues, which can be the tiniest niggly little things, but if we don't put those down, some of the really quick things to resolve, like worries we hold on to that we don't need to hold on to, because if we just had the confidence or enabled to be able to say them, that worry could be taken away from us straight away. So we need to start being very aware of just all of us taking responsibility for ourselves and each other in terms of emotionally knowing what's going on.
And what do you feel about writing down your worries, having a worry journal, or actually making time, like at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, for worrying time?
Yeah, that's a worrying journal. Again, it depends on how it's used. So some people will just fill it with worries, and they'll just then focus on the worries. What I tend to ask people to do with a journal is recognize what their worries are, and then use a strategy to think about dealing with those, and then record the strategy and how well they did and how well they were able to take control of that worry, because that kind of strengthens their resilience in a way. It strengthens their ability to know that they can take control. I also love the idea, and I use this with people to say, our inner voice, our amygdala, I was give it an identity. If you've got that kind of niggling away and making you worry about stuff, you've got a choice about whether you listen to that or not. And often people hear this kind of internal voice, and saying you can't do this, or what about that, and all this kind of doom and gloom, again, which tends to happen more when our emotional arousal is high. We have a choice about whether we listen to that or not. And so we can say, forget it, I'm not listening to you right now. I'll listen to you at 3 o'clock this afternoon. But by the time it gets to 3 o'clock this afternoon, because you're emotionally in a different place, because that's a few hours away, there's a fair chance those worries won't be there.
Yeah. I love the idea of actually sort of looking at, you know, what is stressing you, when, and you know, what can you control, what's beyond your control, and what you can influence, because that's an exercise I did at the beginning of the year when we went into lockdown 3. Was it lockdown 3? I've forgotten how many we've had now. But I was feeling quite overwhelmed, and I had a lot of sort of personal stuff on my plate, with a sort of elderly father who was ill and problems with the family. So I just sat down and wrote all the things down, and then had like a little action plan for the week. And I did it for about 6 weeks, and it just made me feel so much better, because the stuff that was beyond my control, I just had to just let go.
And also it just means you've got it. If you don't get it out some way, either by writing it down or talking to someone, and then find a way forward, you're just holding on to it, and your brain will continue to hold on to it. And the problem is, if it does that, if you haven't got a way of moving forward, that way of moving forward could be the smallest thing. But if you don't have a way of moving forward, and your brain is holding on to all of it, it affects your sleep massively. You know, you end up dreaming more, which means you don't have your deep sleep, which means you wake up exhausted, which puts you on the back foot for tomorrow. I mean, the cycle goes on. And so I think we have to be very mindful about having strategies where we can start to focus on how we can take control, and whatever that looks like, whether it's talking to someone, writing down an action plan, getting out, doing more exercise, whatever it is, as long as we're doing something that we know is benefiting ourselves.
So have you got 3 tips for us to take away, and then we'll open up for questions?
Yeah, I think my first one would be about being really clear about what your values are. So, you know, are you someone who actually wants to be able to engage happily with your family? Are you someone who likes to get out and exercise? Are you someone who wants to stay at your desk until you feel you have achieved every single thing perfectly? So what is it that drives you? And then finding ways to live those, to be proactive with those. So I think being clear about that. I think increase your awareness of your warning signs that your emotional arousal is beginning to go up, and making other people aware. So being really clear about what that looks like for you. There's a fair chance you might not know to start with, so you've got to kind of tune into that, and maybe ask other people, because I bet other people who live with you or work with you will know what your early warning signs are. And I think my final one would be self-compassion is really essential. Give yourself a break in terms of what you're expecting of yourself, and avoiding judging yourself, because often, you know, again, when our emotional arousal is high, more people experience imposter syndrome, that whole sense of I'm not good enough, I'm not meant to do this, I don't fit in, we go into kind of negative thinking mode, and we have to forgive ourselves when things aren't perfect. Nothing in life feels very perfect right now, and there is so much change at such a fast pace that we need to acknowledge it's going to emotionally have take its toll. It's an extra level of stuff we're carrying around with us. We need to take time to just process where we're at with everything, how we think we're doing, when things are not going well. I mean, I've had to do a lot of that this week with just workload, and just thinking I can't concentrate because of stuff going on my ankle or whatever. And actually, you just got to go, it's okay. I can't be perfect today, or I can't get this piece of work done today. I'm going to have to just explain to someone. And you know what? When we have the courage to do that, people often understand. The little negative voice in our heads stopping us from communicating outwards and saying this is what's really going on.
Yeah. So if people want to contact Lisa, we've put her details in the chat. It's at the very, very beginning of the chat. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask? Or have you got any tips that you'd like to share? I know Michael has. How you deal with stress, or what's stressing you out at the moment. So actually, one of the things that I find when I get very stressed and overwhelmed, I get very tired very quickly. And this is something that I never really realized, but my partner picked it up. I'll be in the middle of doing something, and then I'll just go, I just can't do this anymore. So it'll be like cooking dinner or something like that, because I've got so many other sort of stresses, and it's just like my energy just drops off the edge of a cliff. So I know that's one of my stresses.
And I think when we know what our stresses are, the things that are pushing us too much, or we know that we're in that place where we're not being the nicest person we could be necessarily, or being as patient or whatever, by explaining that to people around you, it really helps the empathy. So if you're being quite short, I'm talking from personal experience this week, my family who are being like saints, if you're being quite short with something, or just quite snappy, or just quite irritable about whatever it is, because it doesn't matter what the reason is, if you know you're in that place, to be able to say to people around you, I'm really sorry, this is not about you, this is because I'm worried about, or I'm just preoccupied with, it means that people can go, oh, phew, that's okay, and they carry on their life as normal. If you don't communicate that, the danger is everyone in your little system, whether that's at work or at home or wherever, will end up, if they're in a place of emotional arousal as well, their amygdala is then registering what's going on with you, thinking of what have I done wrong, and why should, and suddenly you have this like vicious cycle where the whole team or your whole family is suddenly walking on eggshells. Communication is absolutely key.
Definitely, yes. Michael, did you want to say something?
Yes, thanks. So I just wrote down a few words from when I joined a bit late. Sorry about that. You were talking at the start about, I suppose, the culture within the office, the work environment, should I say. And it was interesting because you were talking about, well, what I wrote down was this whole idea of normalizing the mental health check. And I watched a brief video the other day along these lines, where there was a couple of guys in the wood, gone for a walk. There's one guy lying under a tree that's fallen on him, and his friends, they say, "How are you doing?" Just completely not seeing the tree on his back. And the guy's, "Yeah, fine, having a good day. Let's go for a walk in the wood." And the guy's, "No, really, look, wood, big tree on your back. How are you doing?" "Oh yeah, well, since you ask, I've got a tree on my back and I can't do anything, and my life's terrible because at the moment, blah blah blah." And I mean, it was a wonderful image to see in this short video, and it really emphasizes the fact that, if somebody asks you in the work environment, "Well, how are you doing?" do you feel safe to tell them you've got this huge tree on your back, or is it just not comfortable to raise this with them? You don't know how they're going to respond. And it's something that I've sort of recently learned, that it is quite okay to raise that maybe you've hit a limit, or attending meeting XYZ, just you've got a bit much on your plate right now, and knowing that it's okay and that you're not being judged to say no, that this is wrong. But to have a scenario where you're not being judged, you need those around you. You need that culture that you referred to. You need to know that you're in a culture that gets it, that understands why they shouldn't force you to attend a meeting. If you said no, it was no for the right reason, and they've got to respect that. So it's not normalizing it so that it's safe to speak up. I remember, I had a lot on in the past in my work, and I just felt that I couldn't say no to anything because I would be judged for it. And the reality, if the culture's right, the reality is it's good, it's acceptable to say no. And your colleagues then see that it's acceptable, and that they'll start mirroring it. And it's all being mirrored for the right reason. So I think that's incredibly powerful, that whole speaking up. And what Lisa's talked about, her word psychological safety, is what it's all about, is psychological safety in the workplace there.
And I think it's how we demonstrate that with each other. So I'll have lots of people say to me, "Well, my team always know my door's open," metaphorical door at the moment, but they know they can come and talk to me. Or I said, if you're worried, just pick up the phone. But they'll say it once and that's it. And of course that doesn't change anything. So if you're really wanting to reduce burnout, for people to be more open about what they've actually got on, what's under the tip of their iceberg, like what's kind of front of mind today or this week, we need to be asking like daily, and we need to be not just saying, "Oh, how are you?" and someone says fine, and you're like, great. Don't ask that question, "How are you?" because it's the worst question ever. People are just polite and just skim because they don't really want to hear. It's like, no, so I'm actually, let's take 10 minutes. Tell me what's going on for you this week. Like, what's going on at home, or what's going on you know, that's kind of occupying your mind this week, what you're worried about, what you're excited about, actually spending time, and then say, you know, if someone's got something coming up, make sure you check up on them afterwards. Make sure, you know, how did that appointment go? How was that meeting with a client you're worried about, or whatever it is. Checking in really regularly demonstrates really clearly that you are serious about hearing what's going on for people, and you're serious about supporting them, so that when something does come up, they will then come and speak to you. So it's doing it, just having the offer out there and say, that's a bit like ticking the box for me. It's like, yeah, I've done it, but it doesn't really change anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that, how are you? And you say fine. Yeah, what does fine mean? Sorry, Michael, you were going to say something.
The one other thing I was going to mention on a slightly different note towards the end, I think you were talking about people need to know how they're measured as well, and to do with their output and so on. And I read an article recently, and it was talking about people sort of satisfaction in their job, the reasons they might move away from their job, etc. So often it's linked in with, do they feel a sense of winning in their job? And it talked about this idea of having constant little wins in your job. And if you feel you have little wins, you get to the end of the day and you feel a sense of satisfaction over what you've done. So when you were talking about people need to know how they're measured, you know, and maybe that's measuring on output, as you were saying, Lisa. If people know that that is how they're measured, then their goals are orientated around that, and they can aim to achieve that. And as long as you can help them to achieve it through little wins, then actually they're going to sort themselves out in getting confidence about their ability, because they're winning, and a satisfaction out of their day and out of their job overall, because they can see the progress that they personally are making. So that's linking in what you were saying with what I've read there. I was my eyes were opened really in amazement when I read this idea of yes, of course, little wins. I get big kicks out of it myself. So of course, it's obvious.
Yeah. And it is being clear about what it is we're looking for. Which behaviors are we looking for? Are we looking for people who are just stuck in their little silos with their head down, churning out stuff? Or are we recognizing rewarding behaviors where people are collaborating, checking in with each other, taking time to do that stuff? And that's where I was mentioning, you know, we have to be very in line with our values, but that has to be at a leadership level. It has to be about, as an organization, being very clear about what is important to you.
Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up now. I haven't given anybody else a chance to talk.
No, that's fine, Michael. Great. Thank you for your contribution. Is there anybody else got any questions or things that they'd like to share? But anyway, I'd just like to thank Lisa so much for her time today. It's been really, really interesting. I've learned a lot. I've been making notes. And so I just want to wish you a great rest of the day, and we'll see you on the next ZestCast on the 30th of September at 12:30.